into the Q&A segment, and let me encourage a few more good questions to come in. We have a few, but we have room for more. This is where we address any questions you have about data mining and predictive analytics. You can consider this our free consulting segment of the webinar, Open Access to the Modeling Agency's Advanced Analytic Gurus, Senior Consultants Keith McCormick and Scott Terry. So each question you submit will receive multiple perspectives. We do have, like I say, a few questions coming in now, but again, this is a medium-sized group that's being a little bit shy, both on registration and certainly in the questions coming in right now. We do have a couple to get started with, but like I say, there's room for a few more as we have about another 15 minutes to go. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel. I'll be pleased to read them aloud for myself, Scott or Keith to respond. Keith stepped out. Let me take a look. Yeah, he's not returned yet, but Scott and I can field for now. You'll be in great hands, I'm sure. Let's start with the first question. This comes in from Aaron. Do you have any case study or client examples that you can share where predictive analytics has been used to determine what types of customers to turn into long-term customers that don't churn? So I guess kind of a retention model or an attrition model. What were some of the top-level goals and metrics used? This is a great question for Scott, I think, to start out with. Scott, can you address Aaron's question? Let me know if you'd like me to repeat any part of the question.
Yes. First of all, I put myself on mute. I want to verify that you can hear me again. Can you?
You are coming through crystal clear, and thanks for the mute because I'm now catching my echo, so that's perfect.
Okay, super. Well, that's a great question. The case study part of the question is a tough one. There's a good news and bad news. The bad news is that clients typically do not like to share information about what they're doing. It's usually when we do predictive analytics and modeling and this kind of stuff, they want to keep it close to the vest. They don't want their competitors to know what's going on. But the good news is there's lots of stuff on the web. If you do a search, you can find some case studies because this is a pretty common application. In terms of the types of things that or the types of consumers that do or do not churn, it's really not that consistent. It can vary by industry and it can vary within an industry for a particular company, but from a high level you generally look for activity that precedes when somebody churns. Sometimes that's maybe customer complaints. It may be changes in plans or relationships in terms of costs and benefits. But there's really no consistency of, across the board in terms of the types of consumers because different types of consumers like different types of products.
Yeah, those are great considerations, Scott. I'd since each of our responses come up with different perspectives, I think I'll also address Aaron's question with respect to this in that, case studies are always tricky in our practice because each situation, each engagement is so highly situational. The data that's available, the way that we structure the question, the way that the organization handles the results or even measures the impact. And what becomes really tricky, as Scott was alluding to, is where there's, particularly with the very successful applications, is the request for privacy. The first thing we do, even before we start discussing data, even prior to looking at it, is to go under some pretty tight NDAs. So we have to speak pretty much in some major generalities. Nonetheless, even for the case studies that we do have, and we're going to point to a few of them in the follow-up email. You have a link to a few that you can reference there that are specific to the modeling agency that we had to very carefully assemble. Some clients will allow us to mention them by name. Others will say not our name, but you can offer some of the specific outcome metrics and lift. But regardless of that, even if we can express these very specific outcomes or cases, I think they're inspirational. But they can also be misleading because they are so highly situational. We could have had 10 tremendous successes, and the 11th is not going to succeed for a host of typically strategic reasons, as Keith presented in his in his presentation. So that's where I would say don't be fooled by a lot of the case studies that you see. There's a very methodical way to get started to reduce risk and to maximize the chances of success in your organization. And part of the risk is that comprehensive assessment. You saw that 7-phase model, and the first 2 phases are assess and plan. When you do the comprehensive assessment, you're able to diffuse bombs way upstream, and at times it recommends not starting yet. You're not at the starting line, and had you started, you were going to end up with failure, and it was going to maybe cost you some internal political capital in being able to get funded to try, to build out more of a practice than just a process. So something to keep in mind about approaching this. Now, Aaron's extended the question, perhaps partially because of my beat down of case studies, but should have asked for case studies looking for goals, metrics recommended for understanding who long-term customers are. Okay. And Scott, if you'd like to add to that, goals or metrics recommended for identifying longer-term customers, I guess that's drawn out from the data. Of course, we want to be data-driven in the decisioning, but have you seen general indicators that, I guess we wouldn't want to lead the model or keep it from being objective, but what in your experience, looking for goals metrics recommended for understanding who long-term customers are?
If I can kind of blend both of those together, first of all, I'm glad that the question, there was a follow-up question, because after I got I didn't address the metrics part. And where they all intersect together is that you have to realize that predictive analytics is a team effort, and it's generally one piece of an important puzzle that involves other functions within the organization. In this case, we're talking about marketing, primarily, sometimes finance. So the metrics themselves aren't necessarily as related to the modeling output as it is initial goals and objectives that you set prior to even developing a model. And those goals and objectives are usually cost-benefit oriented. So you establish your goals, and usually that's, we want to retain customers, whether it be for the long term or for a shorter term in terms of reducing attrition. And there's a cost benefit to it, and those costs and the benefits delve into the financial aspects of it, which are related to how much does marketing spend in order to retain customers, and how much revenue do we get from them in order to break even and make a profit.
Great consideration. I love the fact that you brought up the team as well, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around the players involved with running an analytic function. And I think those players are a lot smaller than most perceive from an analytic perspective, and a lot larger from a strategic perspective. And one of the things that I think that a lot of kind of rookie organizations overemphasize when it comes to outsourcing some of, or looking for guidance in analytics, or when they call on us, is how much experience do we have in their specific industry. And we can pretty much speak fluently across industries, but I would say that even if you found a consultant who has an extensive amount of industry background in your specific area of practice, not necessarily a good thing. It's far more important to have a seasoned, high-level strategic consultant who's an expert in analytics that's more of a generalist, who understands how and when to use your domain experts, than it is to have a tremendous amount of domain experience in your specific industry. That way, the senior consultant knows how and when to interview those domain experts, and it's more at the tails of the overall modeling process. So they'll interview leadership and those who are either going to integrate the end results, or the users that are going to put it into action. They will interview any analysts who are involved, certainly, and that's the most obvious one, and also domain experts. And once they interview the domain experts to understand more of the dynamics of the data that we're looking at, and as Scott had presented, What do outliers mean when we start to explore the data? Then when we get into the middle, that's kind of when we want to exclude ourselves from the domain experts to make sure that our resulting model continues to be objective. That's one of the great benefits of predictive analytics, is the ability for the model to derive its own objective rules. But we need a lot of domain expertise. Even if we do know the industry very well, that doesn't mean we know the dynamics of your specific business and the questions we need to answer, and the nature of the data and how it was derived. That's got to come from your internal domain experts. They're not necessarily the analysts. They can be completely separate from the analysts. They're the ones that understand the behaviors of the problem that we're pursuing. And we'll need them again at the end. So they're really at the tails of the process. So when we come up with the model results, then we'll need their guidance again to interpret those results, to understand some of the nuances, to understand how to put them into practice. Then we reconvene with leadership as well. Functional leadership is also involved, but with stakeholders and C-level leadership, we've got to understand how to translate these results into terms that they've expressed at the very beginning of the project. What are the metrics by which they're going to evaluate impact and lift and return on the modeling effort? That's what's important, not how we think is sexy to display the results, Tableau or anything else. It's got to be in terms that are important to them, for them to adopt the results, to understand its impact, and to fund further build out of not just a project, but of a practice. And that's where, when we come into an organization, we don't want to look at just helping to succeed with a single project. We want to use that project to start forming a factory, a sustainable practice, and to make sure that the organization understands how to utilize all resources, people resources, the data resources across departments, internal, external, data enrichment, all of those things in a very coordinated and purposeful way to impress leadership as to what analytics can do, and start handling the change management that's necessary to start moving from gut level decisioning to data driven. So I've rambled quite a bit there, Scott. Let me take a pause here, because actually we have the vast majority of those who started with us. I would say about 80% who started out the webinar still with us. So I think very interested, but still a little shy in asking questions. So let me take a pause here, see if you'd like to expand on anything that I've touched on around teams and process and strategy, those kinds of things with analytics. And Erin, you're welcome. She just thanked us for the response. My pleasure. Scott?
Yeah, I don't think I would extend as much as emphasize, and emphasize the fact that predictive analytics and your analytical function does not exist in isolation. It requires, you're usually doing what you're doing for another sponsor within the company, and the objectives and the measurement criteria are usually not statistically based. They're actually based upon, usually financial metrics that a model doesn't necessarily, it can, but it doesn't necessarily deal with.
Oh, that's a great point. I remember that saying from our late Tony Rathburn, who passed away late last year, one of our senior consultants, who said that, technical artificial metrics like R-squared, model accuracy, does not equal organizational performance metrics. They have to be translated, and that translation doesn't come when the model has its, obtains its pattern matching results, or the insights that come out of the model. It comes from when we do our assessment and planning up front. What's important to the organization, and how do the model's artificial metrics translate into the kind of impact from the way that we're going to make the models actionable. And that's one of my pet peeves, is the term prescriptive analytics. Any predictive analytics should always be prescriptive. That's why I don't use that as a designator. It's just a given. So I've never adopted prescriptive analytics. We should always be aiming for that. That's something else. Part of Keith's presentation was that you've got to plan to deploy from the very start. Even though you want to start teasing out some patterns and see what the data reveals, not a wise idea to just do that information discovery if it's not going to match up with what's important to the organization. So hopefully a lot of great nuggets there for everyone to consider. One other common question, since we have kind of a shy group today, Do we record and distribute the webinar? We do not. We do it on purpose because we want to welcome everyone back to another live event. We offer this monthly. Now that you've had your orientation to the content, think about some questions you want to bring back next month, and we'll be glad to address them in next month's event. You'll find the schedule at our website, and the webinar link is right there at the top of the navigation on every page of the website. But at 29 minutes after the hour, we'd better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Keith and Scott for your great segments and the highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly, like I mentioned, with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. Make sure to register quickly to secure one of the few remaining early bird discount seats for the May 16th to 20th series in Washington, D.C. coming up very quickly. Or mark your calendar now and secure the very early bird discount for the Los Angeles production in August if the timing and location work out better for you. And keep in mind that your colleagues can join you anytime for 30% off at the same event. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then we'll remain on call until the next time you need us. Meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.